Hi, I'm Dan Donovan. Welcome to Correct Me If I'm Wrong. Today we're going to be talking about the problems with policing in Canada. But first we want to talk about the RCMP, then we're going to talk about the OPP, and then the Ottawa Police. I have a guest with me today, a national expert in policing, Professor Darryl Davies from Carleton University. Professor Davies is recognized for a number of papers and other books he's written on policing. He lectures regularly at Carleton, and in fact, he wrote the report after the 2007 tragedy of the Mayerthorpe killings of 4 RCMP officers out in Alberta, tragic shooting that destroyed so many lives. In the aftermath of that shooting, Professor Davies wrote a report that determined that the RCMP should have carbines. These are better automated weapons in their cars to respond to incidents. The current commissioner of the RCMP ignored that report, Commissioner Bob Paulson, as he's ignored so many things. And of course, this led to tragic circumstances years later when in 2013 in New Brunswick, 5 RCMP officers were shot. 3 of them were killed, 2 wounded horribly because Mr. Paulson, among other things, didn't do his job. Mr. Paulson, the current commissioner of the RCMP, you might recognize the name. He was the commissioner who appeared weeping before a press conference in almost a deplorable meeting several months ago to announce a $100 million fund for victims of sexual abuse in the RCMP, female constables who had been abused over their careers. Now, Mr. Paulson in 2013 appeared before a Senate committee where he snidely and arrogantly dismissed these claims. Now, of course, at the time, there was a different Prime Minister, Prime Minister Harper, and they weren't interested in this issue. So Mr. Paulson dismissed it all, yet a couple of years later, he's there announcing a $100 million victims fund. Now, here's the interesting thing. Not one person was fired for that predatory behavior. So what you've done is the taxpayers here are paying the load, paying the freight on this, $100 million plus another $50 million in legal costs. Well, no one's been charged. This is the same Mr. Paulson who's overseen the RCMP when they've had sexual predators teaching their courses, running around naked at the National Police College here in Ottawa. This was widely reported last year. The same Mr. Paulson whose investigators headed up the very politicized Mike Duffy investigation, where they charged Mr. Duffy with over 31 charges, criminal charges, all of which eventually, as we know, were thrown out in court. One of those charges was a bribery charge. Now, you don't have to be a Einstein to understand that bribery means that there's a briber and a bribee. Apparently the RCMP investigators didn't get this, nor did Mr. Paulson. So there's a whole litany of problems with the RCMP. Lots of people think he should be gone. He's not gone. Now let's move from the federal police to the OPP. In Ontario, the police have become horribly politicized. They were actively involved for the Liberal Party of Ontario in the last election. That many of their members wrote supporting Premier Wynne, which is just a no-no. They shouldn't be supporting anybody. They report to the provincial government. Now, the Premier had 2 of her people charged just less than 2 months ago with serious charges in her office related to a by-election. Now, the problem is that the charge is bribing an official. The Premier was part of that investigation. The OPP investigated her, yet her deputy chief of staff was charged and another senior official. The problem is the Premier wasn't charged. We don't know what the OPP said to the Premier. There's no transparency. The investigation took 2 years, and it's an interesting thing. When it involves senior government officials or when it involves the police investigating the police, all of a sudden it takes a year, 2 years, 3 years before a charge is laid. When it's a regular citizen, boy, the police are pretty quick to lay a charge within 4 to 5 to 6 days, no problem. So the entire process, the question of the integrity of the process in policing is at risk right now and is seriously problematic in this country. In Ottawa, at the local level, the Ottawa Police, Charles Bordelot, has been trying to make some significant changes. We have a guy who's the head of the Ottawa Police Association who I think really needs some oxygen. Maybe anyone watching this could send Matt Scoff some oxygen, because that'll really help him out a lot, because this guy's dumber than a bag of hammers. I mean, this is a guy who's never seen police misconduct that he can't find an excuse for. Moments within an hour of this becoming public, the killing in Hintonburg, the beating to death of one of our citizens by two policemen, both who, by the way, were on the sunshine list. Both the police officers who beat this man to death one made $158,000 last year and the other made $165,000. And I'm sort of sitting here thinking, how can that be? How is it that we can be paying these people so much money? And I'm also thinking, hey, if we're paying them that much money, surely we should be getting some better judgment and training and a response at a scene like that involves something other than them beating a man to death. But that's under investigation right now, apparently. The problem is they're both still working for the police. They both haven't been charged. And even if they are charged and found guilty of something, they will remain on the payroll until they're found guilty and sentenced, much like in the Sammy Ateem case. So, Darryl Davies is here today. He's a professor at Carleton University. Darryl, tell me, have I got this wrong? Am I missing something?
No, I don't think you're missing anything. I think that's the problem right across the board, right from recruitment to training to accountability. And I think a major problem here is that the people who are leaders, the politicians involved, in the case of Bob Paulson, for example, we have a new Liberal government in power, a new Minister of Public Safety, and I think there was a lot of hope that with Mr. Goodale being appointed that there would be changes, but unfortunately that hasn't happened.
Why is that? Why do you think that Bob Paulson, who by any moderate standard, anyone would have to say, just looking at the tenure of this guy, there's been massive incompetency. Why is he still in there?
There's only one word, and that is inexplicable. I cannot account for it. There's no logical or rational reason why he should be commissioner. The rank and file don't support him.
Can I just on that? Can you remind us of what happened in New Brunswick? There's a labor case in New Brunswick. The five RCMP officers who were shot because they didn't have the proper equipment to defend themselves.
Safety equipment. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened.
Why is that? Why do you think that Bob Paulson, who by any moderate standard, anyone would have to say, just looking at the tenure of this guy, there's been massive incompetency. Why is he still in there?
There's only one word, and that is inexplicable. I cannot account for it. There's no logical or rational reason why he should be commissioner. The rank and file don't support him.
Can I just on that? Can you remind us of what happened in New Brunswick? There's a labor case in New Brunswick. The five RCMP officers who were shot because they didn't have the proper equipment to defend themselves.
Safety equipment. That's proceeding to trial in April of next year, 2017, and back about a year ago, the commissioner of the RCMP, Bob Paulson, stated at that time they had all the equipment they need. They didn't need any additional carbines. They didn't need any additional bombs.
Now this is after he threw out the report you gave him several years ago after Mayor Thorpe.
Absolutely, just completely ignored
saying
the
that
report.
they needed those weapons.
Yep. Not only did he ignore the report, I mean, to show you something about the character at the end of the man, he actually ordered his staff not to communicate, write to me, phone me, or anything. I mean,
why is that?
To this day, I have no idea.
So what's the court date? What is that about? The Labor Board down there?
Labor Board laid charges against the RCMP. Each one carries the possibility of $1 million fine, and it's in relation to the failure by the RCMP to provide adequate equipment,
to protect their.
That's right, to protect the health and well-being of officers in the field. So
now, can we jump from that province, and that's a federal case, of course, to Ontario and Premier Wynne? I'd be interested in your take on this. You've got a premier who somebody directed her staff to offer what I would define as a bribe. If you're offering somebody something to not do something. Now the interesting thing is the person they were trying to bribe, they ran into somebody who had some integrity, because this gentleman had run previously, Andrew Olivier I think was his name, he had run previously for the Liberals that almost beat the NDP candidate. The NDP candidate, typically, got to Toronto, didn't like Toronto, wanted to quit the job, and then they have to call a by-election. So Olivier wants to run again. Now, here's what's interesting about this fellow. He's quadriplegic. He's a quadriplegic man. He's got a family. He runs a real estate business. Now, it's like that old saying with someone who has to do something, and it's multiplied when you're quadriplegic. Mm-hmm. They threw him off the bus. They try to bribe him so they can get an NDP guy federally to run. This is caught on tape, and the people are saying on tape that the Premier wants him to do this. So why isn't the Premier charged if they're charged?
I think it's a valid question, and it's one of the reasons why I'm completely opposed to having police agencies report to governments such as the Liberal government when they should be reporting directly to the legislature, and the RCMP to Parliament, not to the Minister of Public Safety, because nothing changes. It's preserved the status quo. It's like they're prepared to do everything and anything to appease their bosses. You have to keep in mind in all these cases that it's the public safety minister is Paulson's employer, and the Liberal government is the employer of the OPP. So whether or not there is any untoward behavior by the OPP, the fact is, from a perception standpoint, it is a conflict of interest. It is wrong. The lack of transparency, it just gives people, I think, the average individual in this province and across this country, a sense that the system, in fact, is corrupt.
And of course, this is really dangerous, and the reason this is dangerous is because the police do important work, and we're proponents. I can say, I've known you for several years, I know you're a proponent of good policing. I'm a proponent of good policing. Policing is so important, transparency in policing. And one of the things that's happening is with this crisis in leadership at the federal level in policing, at the provincial level in policing, at the local level in policing, and then with the bad recruiting and the certain types of police that they're recruiting today, it's ruining it for all the good police.
Absolutely.
There's a preponderance of police misconduct cases where literally police are arriving on the scene and just beating people, not following procedure. The Ombudsman in Ontario spoke to this, saying that the problem in the country is, especially in Ontario, is that the training is wrong. Can you talk about that for a second?
Well, for one thing, the training is not geared for the actual work that police do. So all the research evidence shows that less than 20% of what police actually do in society has anything to do with law enforcement. In other words, when it comes to use of force, firearms, all those things, pursuit of crime, less than 20%, Dan. More than 80% of everything police do have something to do with what we call order maintenance activities. That is responding to noisy parties. In Ottawa, it's even enforcing bicycle regulations. It's traffic, those sorts of things. So the training, therefore, doesn't meet the needs of the 21st century when it comes to recruitment, because training focuses on those other things, use of force, firearms competency, tactical training, this paramilitary, this militarization mentality. So we are training police to behave in a way that is not consistent with the people that they are policing. So the bulk of everything they do has very little to do with law enforcement, and they're inadequately trained to deal with the 80%. So they are not effective at dealing with people who are mentally ill. They're not effective at dealing with minorities. They're not effective at providing, focusing on crime prevention and working with communities. They simply do not have officers who are educated, officers who are well trained, and this is a fundamental deficit in our entire police system today in Ontario.
And then I think you get from that point to the problem with what I call Dumb and Dumber, which is the police association, the union types in the police, whether it's McCormick in Toronto or Matt Scoff here,
in Ottawa, yes.
I think they cause a problem with confidence in the police from the public, because they make excuses for criminal behavior by police, and they're always making excuses for police who do things that frankly should cause them to be terminated. And I think that affects public confidence in the police, and it ruins it for a lot of the really good police that are out there.
Absolutely, because the police subculture does more to create problems within not only the rank and file, but with the community, because they're always taking this protectionist stand, even when there's no valid reason to be doing it, or it's inappropriate to do it because a case is under investigation. What really galls me is the fact that we're not getting service from the police. We're paying all of this money, and we're not getting value for money from policing today. I mean, I'm sorry, but a lot of the duties that are out there that are performed by police should be, basically farmed out to healthcare workers, people who have experience dealing with the mentally ill. We're vastly overpaying police officers who are ill-qualified and, in my opinion, ill-suited to be out there on the streets doing
What they're doing right now.
So let me try to sum up our, correct me if I'm wrong, narrative today, and correct me if I'm wrong, Darryl, but I think what you're saying is that, if I can sum this up, we have a crisis in policing today. There are problems at the federal, provincial, local levels. We're spending a lot of money on policing that's not going to the right types of things in policing, that's not servicing the public. Along with that, we've got this siege mentality with a lot of police who think that they are above the law or treated differently. So do you think that we need some type of a re-examination at the national level about how we're doing policing in this country?
Absolutely.
In fact, what we need is a change in the top at the RCMP. Absolutely, this commissioner has to go. He's been a liability not just for the government. He's been a liability for Canadians, and the sooner he is gone, the better. Because the rank and file are committed to this. I should point out that the Amount of Police Professional Association of Canada called for his resignation. I mean, just about everybody is calling for his resignation, and he's still there. So yes, we need an overhaul at the national level. We need to restructure and reorganize the role of the RCMP because right now it's trying to provide too many services, too many areas, and they're just ill-suited, ill-qualified to do that. When it comes to the province, it comes back to accountability. The lack of, I just feel it's almost cowardice on the part of politicians, because when you establish oversight bodies, which are incredibly impotent in this province, like the SIU and the OIPRD.
What's the clearance rate in those cases, police investigating police?
Less than 10%.
So over 90% of the police's cases investigating polices are
dismissed. Are dismissed.
So, sum up this episode of Correct Me If I'm Wrong with this. We have a crisis in policing in this country, and one of the things that remain a problem for our democracy and something we should all be worried about is the us versus them mentality in policing today, the blue line in policing, the fact that police are not treated like others when they're charged. This is a problem that needs to be looked at, not only for the society and the citizens, but for all the good police that are out there. On a final note, I want to encourage everyone who's watching this segment to Google Peter de Groot. Peter de Groot was a PhD student at Carleton in Ottawa who was shot dead like a dog in the woods by a tactical team of the RCMP last year. 2.5 years have almost gone by and they still haven't laid charges. They haven't, they're still investigating this thing. And again, this is another thing under Paulson's watch. So Google Peter de Groot and learn about it yourself. Watch the family interview. And again, we should all be concerned about this. Thank you.